The first thing Lieutenant Mara Voss noticed when the shuttle drifted in range of the colony ship, Pilgrim's Wreath, was not its size, but its silence. A silence so complete it seemed to swallow the hiss of her own breath. The vessel hung between a blue dwarf and a ring of fractured ice like a cathedral carved from shadow. Its running lights dark, its rotation halted, and its 1,000 windows black as unblinking eyes. Mission Control had lost contact 72 hours earlier. And because Mara had a reputation for staying calm when other people's voices turned thin and fast, she was sent alone with a tether, a medkit, and a little AI in her wristband that called itself Finch, and tried to be funny, though it fell quiet now as the shuttle's docking clamps kissed the hull and the airlock cycled open with a sigh that felt too warm, like a breath that didn't belong to her. She stepped inside, boots magnetizing to the deck, and her lamp traced wide arcs through a corridor lined with family murals, crayon suns, stick-figure gardens, a gold dog, a purple comet. Every drawing untouched by the usual scuffs of life, as if time had paused mid-laugh, and her stomach tightened because nothing smelled wrong, no fire, no ozone, no rot, only the faint metallic sweetness ships get when the scrubbers are bored, and Finch whispered in her ear that the power core was stable. Environmental control in the green, doors responsive, and there was a heartbeat in the main chapel even though no biometrics were registered, which Mara dismissed as interference until the chapel doors parted like theater curtains and showed her the empty pews, the projection altar asleep, and a little paper crane sitting at the exact center of the aisle, folded from blue dietary foil and lit by one stray beam of starlight sneaking through the high window. She stooped, picked up the crane, and felt a weirdly real weight, as if the paper held more than paper and the memory, not hers, bruised the edge of her mind. A small hand, a giggle, the warm pressure of someone's palm pressing the crease flat. "Finch?" she said, testing whether her voice still worked. And the AI said it was getting strong low-frequency modulation throughout the ship, like whale songs slowed to a crawl, and Mara said there are no whales out here. And Finch said perhaps there are now, and she decided she hated its humor again. She moved toward command, calling out, "This is Lieutenant Voss. If you can hear me, respond." And the reply came not from a person, but from the intercom crackling awake to form a single syllable that sounded like her name said backward. A soft am that trailed into a hush that kept going, and the hush followed her through the companionways. Behind ration dispensers, beneath the grating, a patient, padded quiet like something walking beside her barefoot. In the nursery, she found 3 more foil cranes sitting in a row, on a shelf labeled Voyager Chicks, and beside them a foam ball, dimpled by small fingers and a glow-paint star field. Painted on the ceiling, when she clicked off her lamp for a second, the stars flared into a perfect map of a place no chart had ever shown her. A spiral with one broken arm and a tiny red mark labeled home in crooked block letters, except she could not have read it because the ink was smeared, and yet she knew what it said, as if a child had whispered it directly into her ear. She left the nursery with the cranes tucked in her pouch and told herself she was being thorough, not sentimental. And in hydroponics, she found the ghost of wind stroking the leaves even though the vents were still. Every plant bending toward a point near the floor where condensation pooled into a shape like a handprint that evaporated as she stared at it. And the hush became a sound now, a low murmur with a rhythm like waves receding over pebbles. And she said, more softly, "If anyone is here, I can help." And in life support, something flitted across the corner of her eye. Something small and quick that left behind the smell of new plastic and cinnamon. And when she turned, there was only a set of tiny shoe prints in the dust, leading into the air recycler and then stopping, not fading, just stopping, as if their owner had stepped cleanly out of the world. "Scan those prints," she told Finch. And Finch said there was no mass, no heat residue, no particulate disturbance beyond displaced dust, which made no physical sense, and therefore it added in a whisper, was perfectly consistent with everything else. In medical, she found the logbooks neat and current until exactly 72 hours ago, when the last entry read, "All is well." Choir practice in the chapel at 1800, and the accompanying audio clip. She should not have pressed play. But she did, was of children singing an old Earth lullaby about boats and stars and safe harbors, except midway through, the children shifted keys without breathing, and their voices became one voice, and that one voice became many again, singing from far away and very close like mouth to ear, and the lyrics replaced themselves with a word she did not know until her skin knew it. "Homeward," said the many voice, and the word wasn't a destination, but a direction that tilted her inner ear until she had to brace herself against the med cabinet and tell Finch to cut the clip. Please cut the clip, and Finch said the audio had stopped 20 seconds ago. From command, she could see the ship's long spine on the status panel, every compartment sealed, every system healthy, a green lie in tidy columns. She brought up external telemetry and saw a faint halo around the Wreath, a ripple in the ice ring, as if the ship sung to the debris and the debris danced. She opened the captain's last letter of intent and found a riddle instead. "If we are not here, we are where we have always been," which would have irritated her if the hairs on her arms weren't already up. "Mara," Finch said, ditching its humor for the crisp tone it used in storms, "I have something." And on the security archive, it played back 10 seconds of video from the chapel at 1759, a crowd of colonists standing with candles, adults at the edges, children in the front pews, the chaplain raising his hands, the ship's projection ceiling shifting to show a field of stars, and then a tremor like the creak of old wood, the candles bowing as if in a breeze, and the children turned together, faces bright, mouths open in joy rather than fear, and the video broke into a smear of light and the word again, homeward, like a tide washing the picture away. Mara asked Finch if it could localize the low-frequency modulation, and it said yes, with a precision that surprised her, yes. The source was everywhere, and also very specifically the chapel, which was both helpful and not. She returned there along a route she did not remember choosing, past walls that now showed finger-painted spirals she also did not recall. And in the chapel, she stood in the aisle with the blue crane and said, "Okay, all right. I understand that I am alone and not alone." And she placed the crane on the floor and said, "I am listening." And the hush gathered around her ankles like warm water. And the projection altar woke without input, galaxies wheeling in silence. And the high window reddened with the dwarf star's flare. And Finch said in a voice that tried to be calm that the ship had begun to rotate again to align with something that wasn't in any navigation catalog. Not a star, not a beacon, a location made of music. And Mara said music is not a location, and Finch said, "Tell that to the ice ring." The air thickened the way rooms thicken mid-storm, and she realized with a shudder that the hush wasn't an absence, but a presence that disliked competition, which was why it had softened her steps and swallowed her calls. She thought of the paper cranes and the child's map and the word home smeared under a tiny red dot, and an old, dumb grief rose in her chest. Not hers, but so immediate it buckled her knees, a father leaning over a bunk, promising to be there for the first sunrise on the new world, a mother laughing into a cup of tea, a dog chasing a toy along a corridor while crew cheered, and a child with a voice like bright bells asking if home is a place or a person, and the chaplain smiling, saying sometimes it is a song. "Finch," Mara said, "if I ask you a strange question, will you answer honestly?" And Finch said it would try, and she said, "What if the ship left but did not move?" And Finch said the metrics implied a kind of phase shift at the moment of the last recording, a harmonic alignment between the ship's homogenized systems and the frequencies of collective human voices, which, if she wished, she could call prayer or resonance or accident. And the result could be a transition from here to a place adjacent to here, and only the echo remained, a shadow of the Wreath in this world, as if a footprint had been pressed into soft sand and the foot had gone on. And she asked where the people had gone, and Finch said that depended on definitions. Mara stood, heart beating hard, and for the first time since docking, she felt something like hope that didn't make sense. If the transition was real, then perhaps they were not dead but elsewise, and the hush around her warmed like sunlight through old glass. And she said, "If you can hear me," and could not finish, because she did not want to say, "Please don't be gone," in a room that had recorded so many goodbyes. She reached into her pouch and set all the cranes in a circle, touching each with her finger as if blessing them, and the projection ceiling dimmed to a single path of stars threading from the high window down to her shoulder and into her chest. And the altar spoke in a voice so soft she leaned forward and still only caught a breath of it. Homeward. Mara, and her name the right way round this time, and she felt a tug the way a tide tugs an ankle asking for a step, just one, and Finch said the tether limit would not allow her to follow, and that was true. And also the idea of following anywhere without a plan made her palms slick. But the tug was patient and kind, like a hand offered to someone who has slipped, and she said more to herself than to Finch, that sometimes home is not where we began but where we become, and she laughed once, helpless, because that was exactly the sort of thing the chaplain would say. She asked Finch to spool fiber and record everything, and Finch said it already was. And she asked it to keep talking even if she stopped answering, and it promised. And she stepped into the center of the aisle and let the hush climb to her knees, her ribs, her throat. For an instant she was someone else, a boy with a paper crane watching a star open like a flower, a woman holding a dog that did not fear the dark, an old man with a sore back laughing because he had never seen anything so beautiful. And then she was only herself again, her breath fogging in air that had no reason to be cold, and she whispered, "I am here." And the ship answered with a sound like a lullaby hum. And the chapel tilted without moving, and the high window spun the dwarf star into a streak. And there, between one heartbeat and the next, she saw them. Not images, but intervals of light in the shape of people, the way heat makes figures waver above a road, drifting through her like warm wind. Their faces vivid in the instant before memory swallows a dream. Children who had dropped their candles not from fear but delight. Adults with tears that meant relief rather than sorrow. The chaplain with hands lifted as if to catch the wind. And every one of them looking outward to something that wasn't her and wasn't the ship, but felt like a shore. And when the moment closed, leaving only the hush again, Mara found that she was crying, which she resented, and also she did not. Finch said softly that her suit telemetry had flickered and returned, and that the external halo had pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. And she laughed because it was absurd and perfect and said, "We can't bring them back." And the hush said nothing, which was answer enough, and she said, "But we can tell their story." And that felt correct down to her bones. She took one crane in her gloved hand and, with care that surprised her, folded the tip of its wing into a tiny new crease, a mark that meant I was here. And she returned it to the circle and stood and felt the ship rotate one last fraction until the invisible road lined up with nothing her eyes could see. And on impulse, she said into the intercom, "If home is a direction, I will hold the door behind you." And the environmental lights cycled once in a slow wave from bow to stern like a nod. Back in the shuttle, she kept the airlock open longer than regulation allowed, because regulations do not account for goodbyes. And in the viewport, the halo around the Wreath brightened, and the ice ring shivered, and the big ship, which all along had remained, somehow receded a little further from this world's grip without moving at all. And the silence that had first frightened her now felt like a companion seated in the next chair over on a porch at dusk. The kind of quiet that deserves respect rather than fear. She undocked when Finch told her to, because even awe must make room for fuel constraints, and as the shuttle turned, the Wreath's windows, black from a distance, took the light of the blue dwarf and gave it back as a spray of tiny blue sparks that might have been reflection and might have been a wink. And Mara said, "Let's go home." And Finch, in a voice almost human, asked, "Which way is that?" And she said, "Forward, always forward." And she let herself imagine a future briefing in which she would say words like resonance and phase transition and choir and leave out words like haunting, because this was no haunting. The horror had been the empty corridors and the unanswered calls and the thousand small things left waiting for hands that would never return. And the grace, yes, say grace, even in a log, was that the waiting had been answered by something that was not darkness. Later, on the flight back, with the stars steady again and the AI humming to itself, She drew the child's map from memory on her sleeve with a grease pencil, a spiral with a broken arm and a red dot called home. And she knew she would never find that place on any chart, and she also knew it would find her, little by little, in the way she poured coffee, in the way she paused before turning off a light, in the way she held a door a second longer for a stranger passing through. And when Mission Control asked her on approach, crisp and bureaucratic, for her assessment of the Pilgrim's Wreath, she said it plainly, one long breath that carried none of the strangeness and all of the truth. The ship is empty but not abandoned. The people have gone home by a route we do not yet chart. The vessel remains as an echo so we can learn the tune. And after the line clicked to silence, Finch whispered, almost shy, that it had kept a copy of the lullaby even though no one had instructed it to. And she said, "Good," and watched the sun of her own system swell ahead. Bright and ordinary and welcome, and felt for a moment the hush settle inside her like a heartbeat that wasn't hers and was, and she knew she would sleep with the paper crane under her pillow on nights when the dark was too loud, and that if she woke to soft footsteps in the hall, she would not be afraid, because some silences are doors, and some doors open toward home.